Hello there guys. Today I've got what is the quickest turnaround from purchasing to building that I've had in a long time. This is the Tamiya 1/35th scale Panzer I B, which I bought at Telford back on the 10th of November, so just 9 days ago as I'm recording this audio. This is a lovely little brand new tooled kit which I'm going to start building while I tell you a bit about the history of the Panzer I. So the Panzer I was first developed in 1932, with mass production starting in 1934. And of course at the time the Treaty of Versailles banned Germany from producing any tanks, so its development was initially a secret affair. The Panzer I actually saw quite a range of action, despite being initially designed as a training tank. Panzer I's both A and B versions saw action in the Spanish Civil War, which gave Germany a chance to develop their armoured tactics, as well as deployment in the invasion of Poland, the invasion of France, and in North Africa. It also saw action on the Eastern Front against the Soviets. The Chinese were also users of the Panzer I, deploying them during the Second Sino-Japanese War. As I said, the A version of the Panzer I entered mass production in 1934, and by August 1936 the B version featured in this kit was being produced. The difference between the A and the B versions are quite clear in a number of places. The most obvious is the number of road wheels, with the A having 4 and the B having 5. The exhaust systems are also different, with the A having 2 exhausts, one on either side at the rear, and the B having 1 across the rear. There are lots of smaller differences too. For example, the B has a completely different engine to the A and therefore has a different engine layout, and things like the lifting hooks on the turret are in different positions. Now you can see here that I started to build up the pieces for the hull. And to show you just how small the Panzer I is, here it is next to the Jeep which I made in my recent build. Barely any bigger. With the hull made, the return wheels can go in place, and one of these on each side has a notch on the top so that the tracks can be lined up as intended. The road wheels are built up, 4 of them on each side in pairs, plus a 5th one which is on its own. I built these and made sure they fitted properly, but I left them loose now for easier painting. Incidentally, the leaf springs there which are below the suspension arm is another mark of the B. On the version A they are above the suspension arm. The upper hull is largely one piece, but that doesn't mean it's lacking detail. I left it detached from the lower hull for now so that the tracks could be placed in position. All of the usual Pioneer tools are added at this stage. It's not often that we get any photo etch parts in a Tamiya kit, but in this case we get one for the exhaust, or rather the exhaust covering. And we have this handy little jig here with some slots in it to help us bend that into the correct shape. And then an interesting choice of construction for the tow cable, which actually worked really well. So we have the coil of the cable here moulded, but then each end with the eye on it is a separate piece which needs to be attached. And then that can be draped over the front with some pins to locate it properly. Likewise, the turret is a quite simple construction. Only 2 machine guns as the main armament. This was an anti-infantry and training vehicle after all. It's nice to see that we have detail on the inside and the outside of the main hatch. And of course we do get a figure with this kit. There are no options for the vision ports though to be in the open position. Although I guess you probably could get away with just sort of gluing them on that very fine edge. Talking of the figure, here it is. It's the Commander. And it's designed using the same system as all of Tamiya's new figures, which I must say works really well. They fit together very well. No issues of making sure legs and bodies are aligned or anything like that. And we've got nice key points there on the arms, so again they're in exactly the right pose. This might look like quite a strange pose, but if you look at the reference photos of the time, it's actually quite a common pose in the propaganda photos. We have a choice of heads with the beret for the very early war or interwar period, and the cap from then on. The tracks are Lincoln length, not my favourite kind, but they generally worked pretty well. I glued the individual links together around the return roller and the drive wheels, holding them in place to get the shape, and you can see they look pretty decent there. And here you can see all of my parts ready for priming. We've got the upper hull, the turret, the tow cable, the figure, some of the suspension pieces, the rear panel with the exhaust, and of course the lower hull too, all kept separate to facilitate easy painting. Now, given the number of theatres in which the Panzer I served, I am a little bit disappointed with the options that Tamiya gives us for painting and marking. All 3 of these options are pure overall German grey. We've got Poland 1939, France spring of 1940, and Russia 1941. So yes, 3 different time periods there, but each scheme, as I say, is overall German grey. There is some difference in the colours of the markings and the numbers and so on, but overall I do feel like they're a bit limited. It's also known, for example, that at least some vehicles in Poland and perhaps even some in France had the German grey and dark brown camouflage scheme, so perhaps a bit of a missed opportunity there from Tamiya. Now, I did a little bit of research while I was looking into what I might want to do for this paint scheme. So by my understanding, the scheme that Germany used for camouflage during the interwar period was essentially very similar, if not the same, to the scheme they used at the end of World War I. That has this name here, which I am not going to attempt to butcher, and it's a 3-colour scheme, as you can see: earth yellow, matte brown and matte green, but somewhat different shades to the late war tricolour scheme that we all know. This scheme is seen on a lot of early panzers used for training and propaganda purposes, as well as those that served in the Spanish Civil War. Then in 1937, Germany moved to the overall dark grey scheme with a 1/3 dark brown camouflage pattern. This is quite a tricky scheme. According to the dates, it should have been used on all tanks in Poland and in France. We don't see it on every reference photo, but having said that, the contrast between the 2 colours is so slight that dust and so on, even shadow, may make them difficult to distinguish. In June 1940, Germany then moved to the overall dark grey, getting rid of the brown camouflage. And from my research, I believe that all 3 of those schemes are valid schemes for the Panzer I B. From what I've read, even the first scheme there is valid because the first 1Bs came out in 1936, just before the move to the dark grey and dark brown scheme. Then of course in 1943 we have a move to the tricolour scheme, the dunkelgrau, the olive green and the rotbraun. I think I'm right in saying that Panzer Is were never in that scheme because they were no longer in service at that point, certainly not frontline service. And of course, in addition to this, we do have the vehicles which were in overall German grey but were sent to the North African theatre and therefore were painted in some form of yellow, stone, sand colour over the top of that. And we have some quite famous photos of quite heavily worn topcoat camouflages showing the grey underneath. Ultimately I thought I would go for something different, so I went for this 1927 to 1937 Buntfarbenanstrich, maybe that's how you say it, scheme. This in itself made it quite hard to choose the colours, because of course we don't really have any colour photography from that period. I remembered I had this old Ammo by MiG paint set of World War I colours, and I think if we look at this, the colours here, the 77, the 78 and the 79, are potentially colours of interest. Having said that, I also looked at this picture here from the AK Real Colours book, and this image purports to show an original World War I piece painted in the original colours. And as you can see, they're quite a bit more saturated than the ones on this paint packet. So in terms of the paints, I thought I'd start with that MiG set, and for the greens I've got two options, this moss green on the left or this dull green on the right. I can't really make any comments about the most accurate match, so really I just felt like the one on the right was my preferred choice. In terms of the yellow, beige, ochre, earth colour and the brown colour, I've got three options here. Initially I chose the top option and the left option here, but I actually changed that later on. I was pleasantly surprised that these paints were still decent given they're coming up for 10 years old. I thinned them with a drop or two of Tamiya lacquer thinner, and I was quite pleased with the way that this green paint went down. This was over the primer and a pre-shading of NATO black. As I say, I like that colour, and it seemed to have a bit of a match to this colour image from the Spanish Civil War, which I believe is actually an original colour image, although how accurate the colours are to the real world, I don't know. But with that green down, I could finally construct the suspension and then put the painted tracks into place. These were given a coat of Tamiya XF84 dark iron. I know the tracks are not iron, but I quite like the colour. Plus I have quite a lot excess of this paint after the model shop accidentally sent me a few bottles instead of something else. Now for the camo colours, I looked back at those MiG colours and I thought actually they're not quite right. The earth colour was just a little bit too pale, and the brown wasn't particularly strong either. So instead I went for this AK Real Colours yellow brown, which is actually one of their World War II colours, but I feel like that matches fairly closely that paint sample that I showed you earlier. And then I went for the rightmost brown that I showed you earlier from that MiG set. I don't generally show you me airbrushing because it's quite hard to film in my garage where I do it and the light's not great. But I was very grateful for both the adaptive pressure control on the airbrush that I use and for the ability to limit the trigger so that I can't pull it accidentally too far back and flood the surface with paint. And I feel like that really helped me achieve this camouflage look here. I suspect this may be a case of love it or hate it. I do actually quite like it. I think it makes it stand out quite nicely, and I'm glad I didn't go for the original solid Panzer grey. That airbrushing was followed up with a lot of detail painting, as always done with Vallejo model colours. From what I understand, the Panzers that were used for training vehicles didn't have the national insignia, so most of the decals in the kit won't be very helpful for me. But we do have a few options. So in this image here, taken during some trials, we can see we've got a club image on the rear fender and a white circle on the rear panel, although both of these are Panzer A's. This image is also from a trial, and although we can't see much, we have got some kind of writing on the front there, perhaps some kind of number. This image was apparently taken at a training school. This is a 1B model, and you can see that we've got the 602 number there on the front, as well as what looks like maybe a Roman numeral 1. Although notice that this doesn't have any machine guns installed. This image is a Panzer I A, in the same camo scheme as I've done, but with the skull and crossbones flag there on the front left fender. So that could be an interesting option. This, I believe, is from the Nuremberg rallies, and you can see we've got the camo scheme there very visible on the back fenders, with a parallelogram, Roman numerals 2 and a 5 on the rear panel. And then another image here from a trial, and it looks like we've got some writing on the front right there, just below the turret. It looks like a 0-2. And of course we can't see the rear to tell what else is there. And then finally one more image, also in the same camouflage scheme that I've done, and in this case we appear to have a 0-2, but on the rear of the turret. And again, that's a Panzer I A. So, plenty of options. Unfortunately, I somehow forgot about the decals and moved on to giving everything a pin wash using Abteilung 502 sepia oil paint, thinned with odourless thinner. I think this engine deck is a good example of the difference that a pin wash can make, really bringing those details to the front. Then, sticking with the oil paints, I did a dot filter, putting dots of grey, buff and a little bit of brown all over the model, and streaking them in a downwards motion with a brush lightly dampened with odourless thinner. And I should point out that before I did any of this oil paint work, I gave the whole thing a coat of VMS matte varnish. I think the dot filter has the effect of making the model look slightly dusty, slightly used, without being overly weathered. My final weathering stage was then a light airbrushed coat of XF52 Flat Earth mixed with medium grey XF20, very thinly applied, mainly around the tracks and the wheels, but moving up the hull slightly. Finally, painting the figure, I painted the whole figure in Tamiya XF1 black, and then from above I painted it with a mix of XF1 black and XF15 flesh, just to slightly lighten it, and hopefully you can see there's some slight highlights there on the upwards facing surfaces. Flesh tones were painted with these two colours from AK. And then to make the highlights stand out a bit more, I took a very fine brush and a light grey colour mixed from Vallejo model colour and tried to pick out some more of the highlights on the trousers and the jacket. Thankfully Tamiya give us some decals to detract from my bad paint job. I was slightly dubious about these at first, but I did manage to get them fairly flat on the uniform using copious amounts of decal setting solution both before and after application of the decal. So you can see we've got the cap badge and the uniform insignia. Of course the figure is really important for this kit because it gives you an idea of the true size of the Panzer I. And with that my model was complete. And it was at this stage when I realised I completely forgot to put any markings on. So I've done it now, but unfortunately there are none in the photos. So guys, that was my build of the brand new Tamiya 1/35th scale Panzer I B. A lovely little kit which fell together, great fun to build, really good fun to paint in this unusual camo scheme. Even if it perhaps isn't 100% historically accurate, I do like it. And I can actually see myself building another one of these, maybe from Tamiya again, maybe the Academy kit which has been recently released in another paint scheme. Particularly maybe the Africa Corps paint scheme. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'd like to thank all of you for watching, and a special thanks to my Patreon supporters and YouTube members who were able to see the work in progress photos of this model and others over the last few weeks. So that's all for today. I'd like to thank you again for watching, and until next time, have fun modelling.